Hello and welcome to episode 7 of Dualistic Unity. I'm Andrew.
And I am Ray, and I'm very excited to be here. It's been a very, very interesting week, and I'm so excited that we finished our workshop yesterday on social anxiety. That conversation was so much fun to have over the last month. I've really enjoyed exploring that.
Yeah, me as well. It was a great time. I really enjoyed talking about it. Something I realized throughout it that I just enjoy discussing because we've both been through it and kind of come out the other side. And I think that's just a huge key. And I think I might have mentioned this on one of the workshops, but I was on a podcast the other 2 weeks ago, and this woman who's interviewing me was asking, like, she sees a lot of people who are on social media, posting about similar stuff that we post about, or mental health, anything in that realm. And a lot of them have a similar story of going through that. They weren't, even though now they put themselves out there and are very open and seemingly relatively outgoing just through putting themselves out there, a lot of them kind of went through bouts of social anxiety and weren't always this, like peppy, bubbly, like outgoing, outspoken person. And I said, I think that. And she was like, why do you think that is? And I was like, I think that makes complete sense because people who have been through that knows it kind of sucks and it's shitty. And so they go through it and then they come out the other side and they're like, oh fuck, we can get through this. Like, I'm trying to bring everyone along with me. Like, I'm trying to share the things that have helped me, so that, because I know how that suffering can be, and I also know there are things that can help. So that's why I think so many people who are posting about that on social media did go through something like that. I think it's part of the reason that we do share these things and have these discussions is literally because of those situations.
Well, that's it, right? And even Krishnamurti used to say, how can somebody who's never been in the mess understand the mess? How can somebody who's never experienced what it is to forget that they're being, right, recognize what it is to forget that you're being? So you have to go through it in order to empathize with people that are going through it. And I think that's important. But on the other hand, we also get caught up in details sometimes, right? We think, if you haven't been through exactly what I've been through, you can't understand. And it's like, well, yes and no. I mean, I can understand the emotional spectrum. I can understand, the generalities. I can understand, again, what it is to be abandoned, not necessarily what it is to be abandoned by the person who abandoned you in that particular situation, but I can relate to abandonment. And so in a lot of ways, even without intense trauma in our own lives, if we're willing to open ourselves up, if we're willing to be honest about even just the smallest of emotional pains that we've experienced in our lives, we can open ourselves up to empathy to people who have been through far worse. Never thinking that we can understand, but at least relating to the emotional spectrum that they're going through.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, because even though I've been through things like social anxiety, I know, like, I haven't been through, a lot of the shit and like the really, really tough stuff that people have been through. But it doesn't mean that, I can't talk. It's interesting because I feel like sometimes people say, like, you can't talk about this or you can't understand this. And it's like, well, I can at least try and give my 2 cents. Is that okay?
Regardless,
And
it's happening.
yeah, right. But yeah, so I think it is almost necessary. Like, how can you have any depth in these discussions if you've never been through it? You just be like, just stop worrying. What are you doing? Just stop. It's like, well, there's a little bit more to it. And yeah, especially when it comes, but I also think the idea, someone, there was this kid who was commenting on a bunch of my posts. I think he was just scrolling through my posts and kind of like critiquing all of them and like trying to have counter arguments. So I was in my Instagram notifications, just kind of like responding from there to everyone quickly. and he was going on about loneliness and feeling alone, and he was commenting on a few of my videos about how realizing that you are the awareness of what is, and not this, little me, can be extremely helpful. And he was like, how is that helpful? Like, I get realizing that is great and all, but how does that help me when I feel like I'm alone? It's like, well, the idea that you're alone stems from the idea that you're separate. So if you don't actually feel separate, how alone can you feel? And he kept going back and like nitpicking at my wording and stuff. And I kind of got to a point that I was like, at the end of the day, if you're feeling lonely and have this story of loneliness, no one is going to stop you from continuing to tell yourself that story. And I think that it's almost like a harsh truth, but you've said it to me a few times when I'm, like, say something's difficult or this is tough, and it's like, it really is the truth that no one's going to force you to stop saying that. And it's just something that this story that we want to hold on to, but we don't have to. And we're the only ones who can ever let that go at the end of the day.
That's right. That's right. That's exactly it. And I mean, on the flip side of that, I don't expect you to. I don't expect you to let it go. I don't expect you to do anything at all, because there's nothing wrong one way or another. There's nothing wrong, regardless of how you choose to live your life. That's up to you. But let's at least come to that point where we can admit whatever you do with your life is up to you, right? And so your responsibility is your response. That's it, right? It's how you respond to things. That's your responsibility. And if we live life that way, then it changes a great many things. But it becomes difficult to let go of the story we tell ourselves, because it's familiar, and we think that it makes sense to do so. And at one point I was talking about how our overinvestment in identity is a contributing factor to our perception of division from reality, right? And immediately, because we perceive a division, we're no longer whole. We lack. We feel that lack in ourselves, and it creates a need. And then we look around trying to find something to satisfy that need, and it creates tunnel vision. So now we're trying to get towards that need to solve our sense of lack, which is not coming from the thing we think we need. It's coming from the division that we're overcommitted to. And so we get caught in that loop of trying to satisfy our needs, instead of realizing that our perception of the division between the observer and the observed dictates our emotional spectrum. And people try to say, like, I got to follow my emotions. It's like, right, but your emotions are based on how you perceive your relationship with reality. So you can play within your emotional spectrum, or you can change your perception of your relationship with reality, and then the emotional spectrum changes. So you can get caught in the game very easily, not realizing emotions don't dictate the truth. They're just giving you an indicator of what perception you're in. That's it.
Yeah, it's almost like going to the root instead of staying on the surface and trying to figure out. It's like everyone's running around trying to, decipher their emotions and like solve them like they're a puzzle that's been, askew, and it's realizing that it's not that you have to change your emotions. It's like your perception of them, and the root. It's like, I feel separate, or I feel like I'm lacking because I'm separate. And it's like, well, so I have to change that or figure something out, because I know that I'm separate. I know that I am just Andrew. And it's like, well, have you ever questioned that? It's like, well, I don't want to question that, because I know that for sure. That's what I've been, told and taught. And like, who am I if I'm not that? And I actually wanted to ask your opinion on this. I was asked in a Q&A on Instagram yesterday or the day before about the difference between being the awareness of what is and this human form, and disassociation. And like, I don't know exactly what wording they said, but something like, it seemed like more negative, like awareness was more on the positive side and disassociation is more on the negative side. And my initial thought that I mentioned was it seemed like it sort of came down to responsibility, like being the awareness of Andrew, like I'm still responsible for Andrew, whereas being like, disassociated is almost like it lacks responsibility. And for some reason, like I'm not responsible for Andrew. So like if he goes and kills someone, it's like, oh, I'm disassociated from Andrew, so I don't have to worry about it. And it's like, well, yeah, but you as this disassociated thing from Andrew are still going to experience jail. Like
That's right.
As opposed to the awareness is you're still have that responsibility, but you aren't overcommitted to that idea and perception.
Well, that's it, right? You're not overcommitted to the concept, to the idea of yourself. It doesn't stop you from being yourself, right? Like that's the thing. It's just that you're no longer attached to the fiction about that self. That does not take you out of the relationship you have with your reality. It doesn't take you out of the loop of causality, or at least the experience of causality, right? So yeah, I think that's perfectly answered. But that couldn't have been better said, honestly.
Cool. Cool, because it was on my Instagram story for 24 hours. So yeah, good to hear. But yeah, I mean, that's what it seemed to me, because sometimes people will say that. And I remember early on when I realized that back in July, when it kind of like that flip of a switch moment of like, holy shit, I'm not just Andrew. A lot of people were saying like, bro, this is like slippery slope, you're disassociating, like you are a human, like you are this human, like come back to earth, dude. And it's like, oh man, where is this coming from?
Well, that's coming from how they perceive the world, or rather how they've learned to be comfortable perceiving the world. It's funny. I ran across a TikTok the other day of somebody, and it was one of those trending ones where the music was going along and they're thinking about one thing, and then the next thing it's like, oh, but somebody else said this, and it's like, oh, I didn't consider that. And they were saying, here I am sitting grooving to the fact that I don't need anybody. And then the next scene was, and then my therapist informs me that hyper independence is a sign of trauma. And I'm like, okay, I can understand that, but let's consider the fact that somebody who has codependent tendencies would look at it that way.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, here you are taking away from the importance of your role as Andrew, and everybody else who is dependent on their idea of their role as whoever they are is feeling invalidated. Of course, they're going to tell you, oh, I'm concerned, right? Because I'm looking at it from the perspective that makes it uncomfortable for me. That's it. It's like I made a video about God, as I tend to do. And somebody was like, this is blasphemy. I'm like, is it? Or is it just uncomfortable?
Seriously. It is so interesting how it's all just through people's perceptions. Like that's all it ever comes down to. And any comment you get, any discussion you have, like it's being had through someone's perception. And yeah, I forget what exactly you said, but it made me think of this idea of, I had a friend say to me towards the end of college, because I got kind of worked up in the idea of like getting a job and having a job before I graduated school, because a lot of kids, like my school is very pre-professional, and a lot of kids, have their job lined up like in the fall of senior year. And so in the fall, I was kind of getting like stressed out about figuring it out. And I talked to my parents and they were like, Andrew, like you have one more baseball season for the rest of your life. Like that's coming in the spring. Just enjoy that and you'll be able to find a job afterwards. And I was talking to someone, I think it was maybe around graduation. I didn't get a job till like a month after graduation. It's like, oh, like huge deal that I didn't have one then. And someone said, I'll never forget it. Like, but what about your like, aren't you concerned about your contribution to society? Or like you need to start contributing to society? Because I wasn't at that point. I was like not concerned at all. Like I knew I'd figure things out and things would fall into place. And that idea of like contributing to society. And I was like, what the hell does that even mean? Like having a job and making money is contributing to society? What? So I can continue to fuel this crazy ass machine that we've built up. And it was so interesting to me. But, that's coming from someone's path led them to a point where they believe that, you have to have a 9 to 5 in order to contribute to society correctly.
Yeah, I'm doing it. If you're not doing it, you're obviously lazy.
Yeah. Yeah. It was so like, I was just like, what does me doing anything have to do with you or society? Like, what is society? And that was before I started really questioning everything, but it was still in my head, like, that's a weird fucking thing to say.
And yet, oddly enough, the way that our system is designed, it's actually rather accurate because our system is designed in terms of the UCC, the Uniform Commercial Code. And so everything is based on contract law, everything, including governments. Like the government of the United States is a corporation that is actually, registered in Washington, D.C. The District of Columbia, of course, doesn't have any voting rights because it is actually outside of the corporation of the United States of America. That's why it's registered in that specific district, and that's why the laws there don't apply in the same way. Canada, likewise, a registered company, also in Washington, D.C. And so these are all companies, and these companies operate like every other company. They have shareholders, they have revenue, and they have expenses. And in the case of governments, part of their revenue is us, the shareholders, the participants in the government that we signed on as part of this corporation when we submitted for our social insurance or our social security number, right? We willingly joined the corporation of our country in order to get certain benefits, and we call those benefits roads and the social network, the social safety network, and hospitals and police and everything else. And so part of the benefit of us contributing to this corporation and being willing participants of this corporation is also the corporation's ability to penalize us for not abiding by its bylaws, which is why there is a difference between acts and statutes and actual common law, right? There's a difference between legal and lawful, right? Because it's lawful to drive your car, but it's not necessarily legal to do so in a state where that state's laws prohibit you from driving it in certain ways. And it's because you are a member of that state or a member of the company that state is also a part of. And so you've agreed to abide by certain bylaws by just being part of that system. And that's why every city and every town is the corporation of that city, right? Everything runs around this entire thing that we are voluntarily acting as shareholders and beneficiaries of a company that we call a country. So he wasn't really that far off.
Yeah. Seriously. So like, what happens if someone doesn't want to be a part of it? Like, what happens if someone is born and, their parents kind of are, I don't know, like out in the woods or something, and they're just like, yeah, my kid's not going to be a part of this. Like, do they go to jail? Like,
if they're caught, right? Like that's the whole thing. And there are a slew of laws around, parenthood and how to raise your child and what's expected of being a parent and what's expected of meeting a child's needs as a result of all of that. I mean, as well. But the fact is that child, if that child were to grow up in the woods and then come back into society would not be able to interact with that child until that child got a quote unquote person or a legal entity, a name with a number that could interact with that system, which is why when the police stop you and they say, I'd like to see some identification, what they're asking you to do is identify yourself as part of the system that they have a right to be an authority over.
Damn, that's kind of fucking freaky, honestly. Like, wow, because we've talked before about, smaller societies and how we've kind of it's gotten absurdly big. So it's almost like we've gone from a society where, that actually is functional, that's smaller, say a village of 100 people, and everyone kind of like does things to help out. And now it's just gotten so massive, but it's still we're still sort of paying in to the society with things like roads and whatnot. And yeah, I've never really thought about it like from the company perspective of the
right?
country.
Changes our perspective. But then again, when you do look at it that way, it also changes your perspective of exactly how badly this company is being run. Because, I mean, at some point, the company just went, yeah, we don't really need to base our credit system anymore on actual value. Let's just toss in a debit credit system, and we can all use that based on the agreement that this has value. Meanwhile, we can inflate it as much as we want. Meanwhile, we can dictate where your tax dollars are going to go, regardless of what your preferences are as a shareholder. And I always found that very interesting. I think as taxpayers, we should not, if we have to pay taxes, we should actually have a checklist of the departments that we want our taxes to go to. Right. That would change the priority of the government real quick, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Right. But we don't get that say. And we don't get that say because ultimately it's not the best in the best interest of the people running the company. And the company's best interest is to keep itself in existence. And that means to continue its reign of power, to continue its structure onward. And so more and more, as the system has to protect itself, as its system has to try and keep itself afloat in a world that's changing at a rate that it cannot account for, right, it starts to crumble, and it starts to desperately try to make up for that crumbling with politics and promises and everything else. And it's just becoming a delaying game at the end of the day because it's a house of cards. It's going to fall.
Do you think things like, Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies overtaking it is a possibility in the next, 50 to 100 years?
I think we're just starting to see how that's going to pan out, because what we've done, and this is huge, because I mean, part of the system's biggest playing pieces, or part of the biggest power grab in the system, was their ability to control money, to control the flow of value. And so all of a sudden you have people saying, no, I'm going to put my value into this thing that nobody controls. And that's changing the landscape, because we're deciding where to put our value. And they don't have a say. That's the thing. That's why they tried shutting it down for so long, right? They just didn't like the idea that they couldn't regulate this. They can't control it. It's like, oh no, it's only used by criminals. It's like, no. That's fiat currency. You're talking about Wall Street. That's used by criminals, right? But they don't talk about that, or they'll say like, oh, cryptocurrency is using more energy than anything, or more and more energy, and it's not green enough. It's like, right? Have we talked about how much electricity the banking system uses?
Seriously.
Right? But we don't. And we don't because the argument is one-sided, and it's one-sided because the people who own the publications that are making the argument are the people who are going to benefit from cryptocurrency dying. And so you just have to keep on. That's why I find it so very interesting. Like, you will hear every time Bitcoin drops, everybody comes out, that's it, it's the end of Bitcoin, it's not going to happen, right? And it's like, no, it's going to keep going, because humanity is changing. Humanity is changing, and the people who don't want to look at humanity changing are the people who are rooting for it to fail. And I always find that interesting.
Yeah, it is quite interesting how much, it's always on that side. And I'm just picturing people on the news, like politicians, talking about how harmful, Bitcoin is the environment. And it really is. Like, you never hear it being talked. What's its comparison? The fiat currency, the banking systems, like, well, they're using a shitload of energy, I'm sure too. Like, they're using some energy at least. Like, why isn't that ever discussed?
How many banks are there? How many banks run tellers? And how many banks need electricity or other resources, right? Not just that, but you have fiat currency, you have the cost of minting dollars or minting coins and actually printing money, and trying to combat counterfeiting and the whole thing. Like, cryptocurrency solves a lot of different problems, but it does so without centralizing the power under one small group of people, right? I mean, there is still the risk of that with Bitcoin. If somebody were to go in and buy 51% of Bitcoin, that would change the whole game, right? But the fact is that that's very unlikely to happen. And another one would pop up very shortly after. I mean, this is one of the things that I'm enjoying right now about the Dogecoin Shiba Inu thing, right? Is because Dogecoin showed that, because on Wall Street, there's the fear index, right? And that fear index changes everything. It changes how people invest. It changes when people sell. But when we're looking at meme coins, when we're looking at cryptocurrencies that have really no value. Let's be honest about it. Like they don't really have anything behind them except the will and hope of people who aren't rich, right? And that's what I'm enjoying about it, is the fact that Dogecoin skyrocketed, but it did so based on Elon Musk, and a good portion of that community went, we can't have that, because then it dropped as soon as Musk kind of didn't live up to the standard, right? As soon as he went on to SNL and didn't do anything with it, Dogecoin just plummeted. And so the community went, well, we can't have that. We need to do that without people like Musk. And so now they're trying again with Shiba. And then after that, it's going to be another one like Floki or something like that. And it's not based on anything other than humanity saying, forget this. If it's our money, we're going to put it into something that benefits us, rather than putting it into the bank where it benefits the bank. And then the bank charges me to have money in the bank benefiting them. Like, it just doesn't make any sense. Right. And so that's a big thing. That's a big thing. That changes a lot of things. And I really wonder how much of a media response, or how much the media is going to avoid this conversation when it can't vilify it, because there's so much money in cryptocurrency right now. There are so many big people invested in cryptocurrency that it's becoming harder and harder to make it sound less credible. It's getting harder and harder to ridicule it when you've got billionaires invested in it. And I just think that's great.
Yeah, it does seem like it's becoming increasingly difficult, and it'll be cool to see what happens over the next 10 years or so. Do you have any of the meme coins? Do you ever get in on those? Yeah.
For sure. And the only reason is because nothing means anything anymore, man. Like it's so funny to me, because the world I grew up in, because I was raised at the tail end of the 70s. I was born at the tail end of the 70s, grew up through the 80s and the 90s and whatnot. And I've watched the world change from a very different pace to this incredible roaring machine just hurling down the tracks, just the incredible rate of change that's happening. And throughout all of that, what's really changed has been the narrative that we tell ourselves collectively. A lot of our narratives, almost all of our narratives, whether they be cultural or spiritual or economic or governmental, all of our narratives are starting to change. We're questioning everything, scientific, otherwise, right? And so I think that is the biggest thing to watch right now, is exactly how interesting and how questionable and uncertain things are getting, because in that state, we have the most potential. And in that potential, we're seeing things being created that at one point we didn't think were possible. And sure, technology is helping to some degree with that. But more importantly, our minds are creating these things with the technology that makes them possible now. Like back in the 30s, there was somebody, I don't remember his name, I wish I could, who actually envisioned that one day we would be walking around with screens that allowed us to watch videos and talk to one another, and we could see through them, and they would have windows on them. And this was in the 30s. Somebody imagined that. And sure enough, here we are now. So we've always had the potential. We've always had the capacity for vision. We've always had the capacity to go beyond what we know. Now we're just expressing it at such a pace that everybody who maybe isn't wondering like if they should or not, or whether they're smart enough to, or whether they have the right credentials to, are exploring things. And I find that great, because one of our biggest killers as a society is the fact that we charge for schooling. Like it doesn't make any sense. There are so many very smart people who could do incredible things with their gifts if they could access schooling and not suffer from a student debt to do so, right? Like how askew are our priorities as a people when we charge children to learn how to improve our society as people? Doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, it is quite interesting. It seems like more and more people are starting to realize all these things that we've sort of relied on. And, I was born in the mid 90s, so I didn't experience everything going through, 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s and everything. But it seemed like there was a lot more faith in the system and reliance on the system as, kind of the way things are. And there weren't as many, I don't know, it seems like there weren't as many, questions of it. And now it's like, I feel like we're getting to a point where we're like, why the fuck do we need any of this? Maybe we don't. Maybe we don't need any of this at all. And maybe we can just live here on Earth as maybe it was more so intended, without all of this shit layered on top, and just be. And, starting, it seems like maybe it's starting with our own sort of currency that's bringing the power back to the people, like truly, instead of whatever the next politician's going to spew out of their ass.
Right. Well, that's it, right? It's funny that, our way of governing ourselves, our way of controlling the world, or our way of running this system is very much akin to the spectrum of danger when it comes to using a drug, right? Because there is a certain spectrum in drug use where it's beneficial. It's actually helping your body to process, or it's helping you deal with trauma, or it's helping you deal with PTSD, or it's helping you deal with anything like that. But then there goes beyond that point where you're using it so frequently that it's creating more of a consequence than a benefit. And so, as with everything, it's finding balance depending on where you are in that spectrum, depending on your pain, depending on your suffering, depending on your need, right? But always being aware that overcommitment to this thing creates a consequence. And that's very much the same as our system, right? Like the idea of credits is a smart idea, because if I have a chicken and I want to trade that for some cheese, that cheese is probably not worth the whole damn chicken. So what am I going to do? I'm going to try and get somebody to kill the chicken, cut the chicken in half, trade it with somebody else. That's really complicated. So instead, I'm just going to sell the chicken for 4 credits. The cheese is 1 credit. I'll have 3 credits left to go and spend on something. So that makes sense, right? Like that's just very simple. That like there's nothing about that doesn't make sense. But then we took that and we went, yeah, and I'm going to lend you some credits. And for doing so, I'm going to earn some credits just for holding on to your stuff. And it's like, hold on. Like now we're making money for holding on to money. Like now it's no longer serviceable. You're literally earning for not doing anything. And so we kind of got carried away. The alternative was the trade and barter system, which worked just fine, except for, of course, with the lack of credits, it became more complicated to do. But that's why you had a general store, right? Like that's why you had the town store where everything was kind of gathered. So you could bring your stuff in and trade with the person who owned the store, and they could divvy it up and trade it amongst the rest of the town. It made more sense, right? Everything just gets caught up and it becomes habitual, and then we forget where it came from. And so instead of just the function, we get caught up in the form.
Yeah, and then people start asking who aren't as familiar with it, or children, and we're just like, shut up, it's just the way it is. Just the way things are. But yeah, thinking back to like, and that's when I especially on mushrooms or something, like thinking about how there is a reason for everything that we do, but it kind of gets forgotten almost. Like keeping, we like to be secretive about how much money we have, because it's not like, maybe people treat you differently because of that, whatever, but way back it was because you didn't want your money to get stolen. It's like you could be super open now about how much money you have and not have to worry about it getting stolen. Someone's not going to like actively try and hack it because you have $1 million, versus if they thought you had 10,000, they might just like treat you differently, which is also a whole nother strange thing. But like, I guess it's, I don't know, is that human nature? I don't know. But
now that's a good question. No, that's exactly it. Is it human nature, or is it just another example of us forgetting the function and getting lost in the form, right? And because our need to have more than we need is something we should look at in more detail, right? Like there are billionaires. That in itself is ridiculous. I mean, anybody who says it's not is obviously just wanting to be a billionaire, because that's where that argument comes from, right? It's like, no, there's nothing wrong with it. Well, you want to be one? Yes, of course. And there you go. Okay, so that's why there's nothing wrong with it. But at the end of the day, okay, so perfect example. And I know I've kind of griped about this before because it bothers me. And it bothers me. And I understand my opinion is irrelevant in this case. I'm just more or less harping on it because I want to. But Deepak Chopra is worth $140 million. Eckhart Tolle is worth $70 million, at least. Okay. So, and I understand, I don't expect them to give all their money away, but when we start talking about 10 million and up, how much do you need? Exactly what is it for? Right. And if we're talking, especially if you've made your money talking about getting out of your own way, removing your need for identity and control, what's going on? Like, why are we hoarding? Why aren't we being an example of what we're talking about? And at the end of the day, I would love to see people who don't do that. Like, there are plenty of speakers who didn't do that. Krishnamurti never, became extravagantly wealthy. Thich Nhat Hanh never became extravagantly wealthy. And these are people who brought great insights to the world, right?
Alan Watts wasn't overly,
right. And is why it's because they put their money and their attention into things that had to do with other things other than money, right? Like, I'll be the first to say, if I had $1 million, I would more than likely be out giving stuff to people or giving food to people or something, because I don't need $1 million. I don't. I mean, at the end of the day, there are certain things that I would like that would give me the ability to say, stop paying rent, right? That just makes sense in terms of growing my own food or becoming self-sustainable in terms of energy or anything like that. I mean, that just makes sense for the long term. But outside of those things, I don't really need anything. I don't really want anything. And the idea of having an excessive amount of money, to me, just gives me the opportunity to create things that could help other people change their position by giving them an environment that is conducive to them actually changing as people, right? Like, being able to say to somebody who's struggling with homelessness, hey, I've got, 40 acres, about an hour out of town. There's a bunch of tiny houses on it. We've got, some hemp in the field. We're doing hemp oil in the one warehouse. Over here, we're doing some other stuff with that, and we're videotaping everything. So we're helping the world learn. Want a place to live? Right? All of a sudden, that person is getting out of their environment. They're getting out of all their influences. They're getting a fresh start, and they're doing so by not only creating change in their own life, but learning about how to create social change and collective change, and being an example to other people doing this to help them do the same thing. Like, where's all the money? Like, Elon Musk the other day said something, I think it was to the World Health Organization or World Food Bank or something like that. It's like, if you can show me how me giving you $2 billion or $6 billion is going to end world hunger, I'll do it. It's like, you pompous dick. Like, just because it doesn't end it doesn't mean it can't help. Like, I'm sorry, are we too busy trying to get to Mars to worry about the people that are starving here? Right. And that's the thing, is that feeding starving people doesn't make me look awesome, doesn't make me, an astronaut. And that's really what it's about. And it's like, how much do you need? Like $140 million. And again, I'm not trying to rip on Deepak, because I love his stuff, right? But that's a lot of goddamn sandwiches, man.
So why do you think these people like Eckhart Tolle, Deepak Chopra, like, do you think because if they are truly talking about these things the way that they are, then do you think they don't act? Do you think they're like a tiny bit full of shit, or do you think they are just enjoy their comfort? Because or even with Eckhart Tolle, like, his seminars are really fucking expensive, and he could make that free, like, and do massive ones, like, why? I don't know, like, why do you think that they are like that?
Because I think that, and this is from my own experience, it's very difficult not to be in the world that we live in, right? Like, I have more often than not come up with an idea for, a series of workshops or a book or a documentary or something, with the idea that, yeah, I can charge good for this, right? And then upon about halfway through designing it, if that, sometimes about 5 minutes into even conceptualizing it, I go, right, but I don't want to charge for this. and that's it, because I know what it's like to go through it. I know what it's like to be lost. And then at the end of the day, that's more important to me. I've been without so many times that I know that I'll be fine, right? But it becomes harder to do that when suddenly you have money and everybody around you has money and they're all telling you like, oh, you're not being selfish. I mean, you got to take care of yours. You got children or blah blah blah. Like it's what we all do. Just donate to charity, right? You get a tax write-off, and so you end up swimming in this certain mentality again, and it just becomes very easy to justify what at one point when you were suffering you would have looked down on, you would have condemned, right? And it's just comfort. Again, comfort really does blind us. That's the thing. Like one comedian I really respect is Dave Chappelle, and it's because when he was running Chappelle Show and it wasn't feeling right, he walked. That was more important to him. He walked away from a lot of money, right? And he talks about that in his more recent stuff, but it was the walking away that informed a lot of his more recent stuff. It informed who he became, right? So it was more important to him to not lose himself. And as a result, I respect the hell out of him for that, right? Like that's a big step. And it becomes something that admittedly is hard for people to keep doing over time. It's just very tempting to always to want to feel superior, especially when you have people going, oh, he's so enlightened. Oh my God, he's so awake. Oh my God, like, he's full of wisdom. It's really tempting to go, yeah, right? Because who doesn't want to feel that way? But that again is that overinvestment in identity. There's a me there taking credit for it. There's a me there that's separate from everybody else and justifying my comfort as a result, right? So yeah, it's interesting. I think there's a good degree of learning to be done about the value of knowing what's enough.
Yeah, I feel like that's a bit of a lost art. I don't know, like, or a completely lost art these days. But I do find it's interesting because I'll get comments, and I know we've talked about this before on videos, like, oh, like you're the man, or like you're a genius, or blah, blah, blah. And it's like very uncomfortable because it's that thing where, someone finds out that I played Division I baseball in college and they're like, oh, you must have been a really good baseball player. And it's like, what do you want me to say to that? Like, do you want me to say, yeah, I am pretty good? Because that will, or if I say more so on the side of like, I was okay, then it's like, if this person really wanted to play Division I baseball and they didn't, they're like, oh, well, fuck me. Like, I must have been terrible if you were just okay and you played at that level. And it's like, there's no great way to go. And it's just kind of, I try and be in the middle, like, yeah, I was all right. I had my good days and my bad days, stuff like that. And it's the same for comments, like, oh, amazing, like, just people hyping you up. And it's like, obviously I don't mean any ill will by that at all, but it can be very uncomfortable. And I think it's difficult to respond. A lot of times I'll just, like the comment instead of like saying thank you, even, because
I know
it's just weird.
It's hard. I get that. And there's a part of me that, and I'm sure I'll do this at some point just to express to the people who do leave those comments, like, they're appreciated. They are. I appreciate the comments and the appreciation, right? But I don't want to go out of my way to go, thanks, that's awesome, I'm great, because I've spent so long trying to avoid the temptation that goes with those accolades, right? And this is something that's dawned on me recently, and it's made it a lot easier to take those compliments, is that because I know I don't need the accolades, I'll take them. Thank you. I mean, what the hell? I might as well just say thanks and move on. But sometimes the compliments have hidden meanings with them. And in those cases, I think it's important to correct people. Like, I had somebody comment on, I made a video about reincarnation or the afterlife or something like that. And somebody went like, yeah, this is great. I can't wait to get to the heaven that is waiting for me after. And I'm like, that's not what I was saying. That's very much not what I was saying. I'm really glad you enjoyed the video, but I need to make a response to this. And you try to do so as lightly as you can because you're not trying to insult anybody. But on the other hand, there is almost a responsibility, or at least I feel that sense of responsibility to clarify any misunderstanding based on what I've said, because I certainly don't want that to be the case. I don't want somebody to not have ears to hear and then take what I've said and create toxicity that they could have avoided had they just asked for a little bit of clarity.
Yeah, certainly. I think there are a few comments on that. Did you see the manifestation video I made today running through the airport? And yeah, I saw some comments on there, and I feel like some people were kind of misunderstanding, and because I was trying to express like it's not, chasing versus attracting. It's like the idea of thinking what's best is what you want is what's best. It's like questioning that whole thing that, because most of the manifestation gurus out there will say like, you can attract whatever you want. And that video is questioning like what you want may be directly taking energy from what's best for you, essentially. And I had people commenting that, you never exactly know how someone's perceiving something, I guess, but based on the comments, it seemed like, they were thinking that it was more so, giving energy to an idea. And it's like, no, just allow the universe to bring it to you, but you're still tied to the thing you want. And it's questioning that. It's not questioning like whether you should go get it or you should allow it to come to you. It's like, what is the thing that is going to get or coming back? It's like, that's what I'm questioning. It's like, that's the thing. It's like, how do you know that's what you need?
Because there's a lot of cognitive dissonance behind the entire manifestation movement. And I'm really I'm just going to take a brief moment here just to mention to our listeners that we actually have a manifestation workshop that's starting next Tuesday on November 16th. It's going to be 4 weeks, an hour and a half each week, 1 hour of presentation, and then a half hour of Q&A. And we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of manifestation because there is so much to this conversation, and we're going to try and avoid getting too deeply into it right now, but don't miss the workshop. If this is something you're struggling with, if this is something you're interested in, this is something that I have a great deal of experience in general, and I know Andrew does as well, in terms of just being familiar with manifestation as a topic and what the promise of it tends to be and what the reality of it actually is. So definitely don't miss that. But back to what you were saying, there is a certain degree of cognitive dissonance when we're talking about something that promises an end result, right? And so I've done the same where I've made videos about manifestation, about, focusing on an end result creates a sense of lack. And the response from a law of attraction coach was, right, so you just have to let go of what you want and it'll come to you. And it's like, you can't lie to yourself like that. That's a nice thought. You can't go, I don't want it. Is it here yet? That's not how that works. Like you're still wanting it. And that's if you truly don't want it, what are you envisioning? What are you letting go of? Right? Like you're letting go to receive. That's not letting go. Right? But it feels good and it sounds good. And so there's a wall there, because after a certain point, depending on who you're talking to, they don't want to let go of that idea that tomorrow's going to be better because I'm going to have what I want. And it's like, but even when you have what you want, if you're not the kind of person that can appreciate it or enjoy it or make the most of it, is tomorrow going to be better? Right. And that conversation gets so real. And it still has to do with manifestation. It's not to say that you aren't, in fact, having some great degree of influence over your life. It's just that influence wanes with your lack of clarity. So clarity has to be the first step.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's I feel like I've been on a roller coaster the last, I don't know, 3 months or so, just all over, like changing a lot, all, good things. And it's been a fun roller coaster for sure. But yeah, the idea of lying to yourself is so, and we talked about that earlier. That might have been before we started this podcast on our first conversation, the idea of manifesting, because I was going through like, I am so grateful and my heart is so warm now that I have $10 million in my bank account, and kind of like that sort of standard verbiage of manifesting. And you're like, well, can you lie to yourself? Like, you're lying to yourself, right? Do you have $10 million right now? And I was like, well, no, but I feel good because I feel like I have it already. They're like, yeah, but you don't. It's like, yeah, you're right. It's like that, but that's kind of the standard of like manifesting. And it really does, you realize like it does immediately create this sense of lack, because you can't lie to yourself. You don't have $10 million. You don't have that, car, or, relationship, or 20 pounds of weight lost or whatever deep down. So at the end of the day, you can't lie to yourself. But I don't know.
I
I feel
feel
like
good knowing that it's coming, or I feel good just believing that it's coming, and that's no different than waiting for the second coming.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Like you're just coping with the sense of lack that's ultimately being exacerbated by your coping. And that's that vicious loop, right? Like we try to get away from our misery, not realizing that trying to get away from our misery makes it worse. There's no easy way to sell that. There's no easy way to package that up and give it to somebody and go, hey, guess what? You got to actually learn how to smile through that shit sandwich. That's what you got to do, right? Because that's what's going to change the flavor. Nobody wants to talk about that, right? Because it sounds really unpleasant, but it's because we've been running from it for so long. It's like we were saying once about, somebody who has a habit of lying, somebody who has a habit of being dishonest or just exaggerating the truth in order to protect themselves from people's negative perceptions. The hardest thing in the world is for that person to tell the truth the first time, right? Because they have to break the cycle. They have to stop trying to maintain the web of what everybody might think and everything else. And so they have to take that leap and just go, I don't know how this is going to turn out. Here it is, right? But it's so hard the first time. And then the second time, way easier. Third time, not a problem, right? And by the time you're 1,000 times down the road, you're like, what? I used to lie, right? Because you've just walked so far into the other direction. It's like we were talking about earlier before we started the podcast in terms of the fields within awareness, right? That there are certain directions that you can take, in the same way that there are no levels in spirituality. There are only directions towards yourself and away from yourself. That is it, right? And so it's very much the same with our awareness, is that we can choose a direction. And that direction is either going to be deeper into the perception or the belief in division, or more towards the reality, which is ultimately a lack of identity and a lack of control and a lack of certainty. And that just happens to be the experience of being whole.
Yeah. Do you think then relying, manifesting is pretty much no different, and relying on an idea of money or wealth or fame or success is relying on something outside of yourself no differently than relying on God or Jesus or anything like that? It's like the same same path sort of, and feeling and reliance.
But on the other hand, there's so much more danger, right? Because you can believe that God is helping you, and then you can cherry pick certain things that happen in your day as evidence that God is helping you. But if you got a big fat, wad of cash, you have some control. Like you, in this society, all of a sudden now you have the capacity to directly influence the things that are happening in your day. And so that's very easy to believe in, right? It's very easy to believe in that sense of control, even though it's not control. It's just the appearance of control. Like you can get anything you want, but that still isn't changing you as a person, as the ability to appreciate getting what you want, right? So it's just, again, the superficial appearance. And so we believe in that. Like, if I have enough of that, then I'll be happy. And it's like, no, because money won't change who you are, right? It'll just polish who you are. So if you're an ass, now you're going to be a bigger ass, because you have the capacity to be, right? And that's really it. It just comes back down to the same thing. It's nothing outside of ourselves will ever provide the sense of fulfillment that we want it to.
Yeah, that is a jarring yet freeing realization for sure. And it reminds me of the Jim Carrey quote, I wish everyone could realize their hopes and dreams, to realize that that's not the answer. All their hopes and dreams, fames and fortunes. But yeah, the when you were mentioning the lying aspect of that first step is the most difficult one. It reminded me on the plane today, I didn't finish it. I only watched the first half, but Free Guy with Ryan Reynolds, watched the first half and it is
Hell
awesome.
yeah.
There was a part when I don't want to give any, this won't give anything away, but he's talking to his friend in the game, the security guy, and he's like, what is the point, of all of this? Like, why does it matter? And his friend is like, well, here and now, this moment is real. Like, whether we're real or not, or anything is ever real, like this moment between two friends discussing is real. And does it really matter after that? And that was like his switch. And that was sort of like right after that, the plane landed. And
yeah, it's a brilliant movie. It's really,
yeah.
really well done. And the symbolism is fantastic. And I wonder about this because there have been a great many movies where the message is there, like it's in there. And sometimes it's intentional and you can see when it is. And then sometimes it's almost like it's not. It's almost like the symbolism is within the movie without them even noticing it. Right. And so I wonder about that when it comes to our collective awareness, because we are always expressing the changes within our awareness. And so we have, like, you can tell how movies have evolved over the last 100 years, right? Like, the storytelling has changed. The way those stories are presented has changed. The way characters develop has changed. And it's also changed according to how our understanding of ourselves has changed. Our understanding of our own mind and how we deal with one another as human beings has contributed to how stories are written now compared to how they were 30 years ago, right? And so I just find it really interesting when we look at some of the messages that are in these stories, how profound they are, right? Even the Lego movie was profound. Like, it was fantastic. The whole thing about being a master builder, that's amazing. That's exactly it. Just allowing yourself to be, clearing your mind, right? Like, it really just comes down to the fact that we, or I, or you, or awareness, whatever you want to call it, is talking about what it's going through. The messages are all around us all the time. Like, I find it so interesting that despite how egocentric and controlling the government is as a whole, that if you were to listen to Joe Biden's speech when he was made president, there's one word in that you hear over and over and over again, despite the fact that he has his own political agenda, despite the fact that he does everything to contradict this word. It is the one word that kept echoing over and over and over again in awareness that day, and it was unity. I find that amazing. What was before there was Barack Obama? Yes, we can. Yeah. Right? Like, these are echoes of awareness. These are echoes of our sentiment. And unfortunately, they're used and twisted by marketers and public relations and propaganda and everything else. Sure, but they can only use what we're showing them is there. That's awesome.
Yeah, it is really cool to see. And with that guy, Free Guy it's so, and it is, and because it is kind of like at a high level, the storyline, I could totally see that, being made into a movie, the video game versus, people being in the video game, out of the video game, virtual reality, like we're kind of coming to that. But then within that, it was so clear to me watching it, and I could easily see why you said I should watch it. But it's almost like I was sort of wondering, like, is someone directing this or writing this script? Do they actually think that? Because it could easily not be. It could easily just be, kind of that surface level idea, but it's so,
and that's the thing, right?
Like, where we're at.
Yeah. Now think about what we're saying there, right? What we're saying is that it just happens to be there. Like it just happens to be there and they think they're sending an entirely different message. How often is that happening? Right? Like how often is there multiple messages happening despite somebody's intention?
Mm-hmm.
That amazes me. To me, that's how we're talking about the universe speaking, right? Is when you look at something that you've looked at 1,000 times and you see it in a different way. You're just like, oh, that's awesome. That's new, right? And it's like, yeah, and it's all there. It's all there. That's what always gets me, is that this moment that I'm in right now, every experience of this moment, every perception of it, from being totally depressed to being totally free, exists right here, and I can just choose one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It's really cool. And it's almost like, does it even matter if they're doing it purposefully or not? And it's like, can they even take credit if they were doing it purposefully?
Would they? Would they take credit if they were doing it purposefully, right? And there's so many movies like Groundhog Day. Have you watched Groundhog Day?
I have a while, maybe like 10 years ago.
That movie,
yeah,
man, if you want to talk about the lessons you would learn being eternal, that movie's awesome. It'll just rip you apart, man. It's so good. It's so good because you don't know how many days Bill Murray repeats. And the author actually said it was probably like hundreds of years. Like it just kept going for him. And through all of that, he's learning more and more about himself. But you'll see his character go through the process of resenting it, then trying to use it, then trying to benefit from it to get a sense of happiness, and then getting frustrated that he couldn't, and then finally surrendering. And it's the whole journey is just beautiful. And that's the journey of our eternal awareness, right? Like that's the journey that we go through individually. And the only question is, how quickly can we go through that collectively? How quickly can we get through that process of understanding that we are hurting ourselves by trying to benefit ourselves?
So do you think, like, within our awareness, do you think we've gone through it multiple times, or do you think there's, it's like sort of cycles within a larger cycle, or just...
What do you mean by we? Do you mean humans?
Yeah.
Right? Because this is the journey all the time, in every variation on different levels and different scales. This is the journey, is towards ourselves and away from ourselves. And there are so many intricacies in that journey. And considering how many species there are doing different parts of that journey on different levels and different, like it's so interconnected, but it's always this. Always this, from towards ourselves and away from ourselves. It's always that, moving back and forth and oscillating within oscillations. And that's why it gets to the point where it's just a giant pool, right? Like the ocean's in a drop, right? Like it's so hard to conceptualize or talk about, because you're talking about infinite causality. Like it's not even cause and effect anymore. Right? Because everything is causing everything else to be a cause, and then that's causing the original cause. And there's no goddamn time. And so what are we talking about, right? So like it's so massive that all you can do is sit in awe once you truly recognize it, and that's enough. Once you recognize it, you're just like, damn, why would I want to believe in something that would minimize this experience?
It's a great question. I don't know if I have a good answer for you. I guess unless, you're just tied to that perception. But yeah.
That's it, right? It's familiar and it's comfortable, and it's the devil I know. And I think that's the one thing that really changed for me in my life, was that I just didn't want it anymore. It really just came down to the decision. And I think this is true for everybody, regardless of your situation. If you are done with the consequence that you're experiencing emotionally, if you're done with the sense of lack that you're going through, if you're done with the frustration and the expectation that you habitually go through, that's the biggest part, is deciding, I am done. This is enough. I've experienced enough of this that I'm going to question it, no matter how uncomfortable it is, because the alternative is just more of this. And that's the decision. Once you make that decision, it doesn't mean it's going to be easy, but it does mean that the rate of change is going to pick up, and you are going to start noticing how quickly You are adapting to things because you're allowing yourself to be uncomfortable.
Sorry, I just have to plug my computer in real quick. It's yeah, I didn't have my charger.
No problem. And as Andrew plugs in his computer, I just figured I would mention, because I always fail to do so, that Andrew and I actually do have a Patreon page where we post some of the conversations that we have during our TikTok live streams, and we post some of the conversations that we have before and after our podcast. There's a lot of extra content that goes onto our Patreon page. It's very much worth contributing $5 or more per month just to get access to that content. But in addition to that, I'm also doing a giveaway in November and December to any of our Patreon supporters. I will be giving away a free 50-minute one-on-one coaching session via Zoom for November. That'll be a draw on November 20th. And currently, since there are only 3 Patreon supporters, it's one of those 3 people who's going to win that hour-long coaching session. So if you're interested, now is definitely the time to go and join Patreon. Likewise, in December, I will be giving away 3 hour-long coaching sessions via Zoom. So just being a Patreon supporter there will get you into the draw for that as well. And that was just a quick announcement. And Andrew seems to be back, so we'll continue on.
I'm back. Yeah, there is a high likelihood of winning that right now. So get in there, because the odds are pretty high. But yeah, I totally forgot what the last thing you were talking about was.
That's okay. That's a good point to bring up, because it doesn't matter, right? Like that's the thing, is that whatever thought process we're having at any given point is the thought process that we're supposed to be having at that given point, or at least it's the thought process that we're having, right? And then, as long as we're having that thought process for the right reasons, which means for ourselves, we can just pick up wherever and continue on, because the conversation is really just about us growing as people. It's not even about what we were talking about, right? It's about the continuing growth as people. And I always enjoy that about conversations like this, because I have a very few amount of friends who I know I cannot talk to for years, see them, sit down and carry on as if we were just talking an hour before. And it's just because the conversation is not about the details. Right. The conversation's about being in the conversation, right? We just pick it up from there. And that's the best kind of relationship to have, is one where there's no need to try and impress anybody. There's no need to try and like, oh, I'm sorry. No, just be where you are. Right? And let's continue on.
Yeah. I have a few friends that I can, like, they come to mind immediately, where it's just like, it literally doesn't matter what we're talking about, what we're doing. We're just enjoying the time together and the experience. And yeah, the idea of there not being, a path or anything that really matters, is like, it's getting away from the idea that there is a rigid path that you have to be on, and there is a right thing to do, and there is a thing you should be doing, and there is a path you should be following. And that has been a massive part of my life. And it's like, all of a sudden, I'm here in this awareness here now. And it's like, it is like that field you were talking about in Power versus Force. And it's not like this direction forward. It's just kind of like, I'm sitting in this massive field, and there's an infinite number of directions, and there's nowhere that I feel like I should be going or need to be going, but I'm here now, and I know that, and I'm enjoying being here now. And it's like, it's almost because there is less of a focus on the future, I guess, that it creates this sort of infinite directional potential, infinite potential here and now, as opposed to, picking a point and being like trying to go there. Instead, it's like, I can go anywhere and I'll be okay here and now. And it's awesome.
That's so funny, because it reminds me when I was early on waking up to all this, the visual that came to me was that it was like the difference between sitting in a dark room with a floodlight, pointing the floodlight, trying to see something, or turning the floodlight off and allowing my eyes to adjust so I could see everything. And that's exactly what it's like. It's all of a sudden your very specific awareness becomes an overall general awareness. And that is where your awareness actually increases. It's funny, I always describe it in terms of like, having a battery and then connecting a bunch of light bulbs to that battery, right? The more light bulbs you connect, the dimmer each light bulb gets, right? But if you disconnect all of the light bulbs, that one remaining light bulb just shines bright as hell, right? And that's awareness. That's exactly it. We carry all of this stuff thinking it's going to make it and make our life better. And it actually decreases our ability to have influence over what's happening.
Yeah, it allows for all of that energy to be here and now, and all of a sudden things become clearer, and you're not weighed down by all of these other light bulbs that are using the energy, or baggage, or ideas of yourself or perceptions of the world, because they directly, or things you think you want or you think you need, because they all take away directly from that energy that could be here and now. And it seems like for a lot of people, it's just that they don't have the energy here and now, because it's getting used by so many different thoughts and perceptions and ideas and judgments of how things are, when you don't have to take all of them so seriously. But if you're tied to them, they'll be taking that energy forever.
Yeah. And I mean, how sad is it that the outcome you want to manifest is being held back by the energy required to criticize your manifestation?
Hold on, say that again.
Right? Like, manifestation requires energy. But as soon as you're criticizing yourself for not getting that manifestation, as soon as you're judging your progress, you've just dropped all your energy. So how often are you avoiding getting the outcome you want by judging how quickly you're getting there?
Yeah, certainly. And I feel like a counter argument that manifestation gurus will say is that there is no timeline, like it'll happen when it's best, right? Or like when it's supposed to happen or whatever. But at the same time, like what if it doesn't happen or something? Yeah. Right.
That's it. And more importantly, what if it not happening is the absolute best thing for me?
Yeah.
What if that is what's going to trigger me to learn something about myself, to learn where I've been holding myself back or holding myself in too serious of a light in terms of my ego? What if that experience of not getting that thing is what helps me get to the state of mind where I can appreciate what I do get? Mm-hmm. Which one do I want?
Good question. Yeah, I think the answer is fairly obvious, but it really is. And it comes down to what we were talking about before about, no amount of things that you manifest that you think you want are going to change you. And it's about you here and now. And it always is, and it always will be, and it always has been. And there isn't much else to it, quite frankly.
No, but it's easy to get caught up in the really easy to market concepts, right? And like, there was oh God, I can't remember who it was. It was a manifestation guru, and he was doing a video, and he's like, I've worked with all of the top minds. I've worked with Eckhart Tolle and Oprah, and I've worked with Joe Dispenza, and I've worked with Sadhguru, and we all agree the number one thing you need to do is practice gratitude. It's like, wow, that sounds really nice. What if I'm grateful for things that reinforce my ego? What if I'm grateful for things that actually are contributing to my suffering? What if I don't have the clarity to understand what to be grateful for? So it's not the silver bullet that it's made out to be. And that conversation right there means half as many book sales. Right? And what kind of proof of manifestation is that, right? Like, I want to prove manifestation works by enriching myself and making half the people who listen to me suffer because I didn't give them the full picture.
But doesn't sell books, so yeah.
It's going to be a really good workshop,
Yeah, I'm very excited for it.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, this workshop is very much a workshop that I have avoided doing for the last 10 years, even when I was life coaching, I don't generally talk about manifestation because of so many of the pitfalls that go with it, right? Because there is so much nuance to this conversation. And so the idea that we're going to get 4 weeks to talk about this, 6 hours to just pound on it and talk to the people who participate, because of course there's the live chat that happens and we accept questions as they go on. I'm really looking forward to getting this out and seeing exactly what this has become for me now, because that's really what I'm witnessing as well. Because I don't voice this very often, I'm just letting it, I'm putting the quarter in and seeing what happens, right? And I'm realizing, oh wow, actually my perceptions of this, my view of this has actually changed a lot. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how that plays out in our conversation.
Yeah, and I think for me, just realizing that I've been manifesting my whole life, whether I was aware of it or not, and I have gotten things I wanted, and I've gotten things that I needed that I never even could have conceptualized having ever. And it was mostly from just being here now, whether I knew it or not. And I got into the last few months like writing down manifestations of things that I want, and then I pretty much stopped after our first conversation, because I was like, yeah, that makes sense. Like it doesn't make much sense to be, trying to do those things. And it's just taken like 30 minutes out of my day that I could be spending doing, walking around or doing something. Yeah, exactly. So I'm excited too, because I've, just recently kind of come out of that side of it. And before then wasn't even really aware of, the whole realm of manifesting. So I'm very excited for it.
That's a great topic. There's so much involved with it, right? And like it can get really deep, and it can go in so many different directions, and it can get really conceptual. I mean, you can get into the metaphysics of the whole conversation, or you can get just right into the application of it, right? How do I change what's happening today? And so that's why I'm glad that we're going to be covering this over 4 weeks, because it's just going to give us the ability to really focus on individual topics, as we did with the social anxiety workshop that we just finished. Another quick announcement is that social anxiety workshop will also be available online in various different websites as a digital download, and you'll find the link to it on our website in the near future, probably by the end of the week. So if anybody's interested in that, that's another 6 hours on the topic of social anxiety, on identity, on self-judgment, on why we judge ourselves, and some of the assumptions and expectations that go with that. It really is a deep dive into anxiety as a whole, and the experience of being anxious around people. And so if that's something that you're struggling with, I definitely recommend you pick it up as a digital download, because we probably won't be doing another workshop on it for quite some time, though we are always willing to talk about it on a one-on-one level or on social media if you'd like to contact us there.
Yeah, that workshop was a lot of fun. I'm excited for that to be packaged up. I think I think we pretty much expressed everything, and it was just 6 hours straight of talking about social anxiety and our experiences and everything that we found to be helpful, and answering people's live questions. There was a decent amount of questions, and we were able to talk through it. So I think there is certainly benefit of being a part of the discussion. But yeah, it was an awesome workshop for sure, and I'm looking forward to our next one coming up soon.
That's going to be so good. I really enjoy running these workshops. Like we have a good flow. That's one thing. Even my wife has mentioned watching our podcast, is that we go back and forth really easily, and we tend to stay consistent in what we're trying to talk about. Even though we do deviate from time to time, it's always within the realm of what's relevant to the conversation. And so it's definitely worth participating in. Another thing I wanted to mention about the Patreon page that I mentioned earlier is actually every third Wednesday of the month, we actually have a supporter only live stream where you can jump into a Zoom conference with us and be on screen and actually talk to us live for an hour and a half. And that's every third Wednesday of the month from 6 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. Eastern time. And again, all you have to do is be a Patreon supporter to participate. It doesn't matter what level. So if you do want to chat with us, or if you do want to jump in on that conversation, that is definitely an easy way to do so, because we don't generally invite participants onto our live streams when we're talking on TikTok or Instagram. So that's definitely the best way to jump into the group chat.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, I've enjoyed those as well. It's always good conversation. So I'm excited for more and more people to, join us as well in the discussions. And just, I really like the Q&A part of it. I think that's a lot of fun because we're able to directly help, and talk about people's, thoughts and things they're specifically going through. Because as much as I think overarching, discussions of topics helps, it's definitely more helpful if you can, get questions in about your specific experience, because and it just adds to the conversation that much more. Instead of having, two perspectives, it's all of a sudden, 5, 10, 15, 20. So.
Yeah, and we can answer it in real time. I mean, it's so very different than somebody commenting on a TikTok video, and then we make a response video, but they don't get to reply in real time, right? And so if we misinterpreted the question, there's no backseas. We can't just say like, my bad, let me try that again, right? So it's already out there. So at least in these live chats, you can actually express what it is you're wrestling with, and we'll deal with it right then and there. And I'm really excited about that. Episode 7, this is becoming a lot of fun. I cannot believe how easy it is to do this. There's just so much to talk about, but we're 7 episodes in. The last one was 2 hours long, so I'm glad we're cutting this down to a reasonable time limit, though admittedly, we did talk for a half hour before we started recording this podcast, and that clip will also be available on our Patreon page. So there's all kinds of reasons to join us on Patreon at the end of the day. And there's also some options for some other bonuses and some swag and some epic merchandise and accessories if you're interested. But at the very least, you can also get a bit of a voting say on what it is we're going to talk about in these podcast episodes as well. You get the ability to suggest some topics and to ask some questions. And of course, we're actually going to do the occasional Q&A podcast episode where it's just questions from the audience. And so that gives you a chance to get your question prioritized in those episodes as well. So definitely check it out. And I did want to ask you about something, because somebody was talking or somebody had left this comment on one of our videos, and they were asking if we could talk a little bit about insecurity and self-judgment. And I know we've kind of revolved around that through this episode, but I think what we're looking for when we're talking about these things are really actionable things that we can use in our day-to-day life. Like when we're feeling anxious, or when we're feeling like somebody is judging us, what's a good way to diffuse that feeling? And I'm curious what you would say to that question.
Yeah. I think realizing that you don't have to take those thoughts so seriously. They aren't truth, and becoming just aware of those thought processes, and when those feelings come up, realizing that, because I think it's almost like two different conversations of when you're actively feeling anxious or, judgmental of yourself versus, when you're not, but you're trying to, work on it. There's like two different things. And I think when it comes into it, people get caught up in, I've been working on it so much, but I'm still feeling it. Like I'm still feeling anxious. Like I shouldn't be feeling this. I've been put so much work into it. So they resist and try and suppress and try and get rid of it. And it's like in the moment of feeling those things, it's okay. Like it's okay to feel them. You don't have to get rid of them. You're not going to be able to get rid of them. And it's okay to be feeling them. And the sooner you realize there's nothing wrong with it, the sooner, and that can be done outside of when you're feeling it, leading up to any sort of situation, or when it, there is a situation before. I feel like I'm jumping around a little bit, but before that situation, when you start feeling, anxious about getting anxious, the potential of feeling anxious, realizing that that's okay too. It's always okay. And realizing that it's okay, it's not this bad thing, it's not this horrible thing that you have to, avoid at all costs. All of a sudden, you're not getting anxious about feeling anxious because you know it's okay to feel anxious. So it cuts it at its root. And yeah, you'll still feel anxious. I still get anxious all the time, but I don't take it seriously. And I know that it's okay to feel it. And I know that it's just a feeling and it doesn't define me and it's okay to feel. So all of a sudden it comes up and it passes through me just like any other emotion.
Exactly. That's right. That's an awesome answer. That's perfect. And
Cool.
it's a really good point, because we do judge ourselves for continuing to feel these things. Like, if I made the choice, why am I still going through this? And it's like, the problem with choosing is that you have to keep doing it, right? It's never, I've made the choice, like I'm here now, right? And I've had so many conversations regarding awareness or spirituality or being awake, because you'll often hear the term ego death, right? Like, oh, I've experienced ego death. It's like, and now it's past and your ego's back. Let's deal with that, right? Like that's, and I know it's back because you just said, I'm experiencing ego death, all of which is an act of division, right? So there, it just, we set ourselves up for this expectation of an endpoint where all of a sudden it's just no longer there. And oddly enough, it's not until we let go of that expectation of an endpoint that we actually get closer to that endpoint. Right. And that's everything is half-assed backwards. I say it all the time, right? But it really is. It's just, the more we're trying to get somewhere, the farther we get from it. The more we're trying to be ourselves, the less we are. Right. And getting that whole finger trap mentality, right? The more you pull, the tighter it gets. That changes how you're going to interact with your own thoughts. You're going to start looking at your thoughts with a certain degree of suspicion. And especially your first instinct on how to deal with that thought with a certain degree of suspicion, because you're going to just start practicing awareness of how many different strategies you've tried. So it's a lot like cracking a safe, right? You're doing the different combinations, but you really got to listen. You really got to pay attention to each and every turn in order to see what combination you're trying. Because if you lose track, then you got to start all over again, and you got all kinds of consequences, right? So that's it. It's just be suspicious of your thought and your response to that thought. And eventually you'll get to a state of mind where they have less sway over you, because you're not giving them the credibility to have that authority over you. Your belief in them isn't there. Just like we were saying earlier, like you with the police, you have to identify yourself as being within their authority. Well, with your thoughts, it's the same thing. You have to basically decide you're under your thoughts' authority. You have to decide you are the victim of your thoughts in order to be the victim of your thoughts.
Certainly. Yeah. And it comes back to, belief that it is truth, and realizing that it's not and questioning it can be hugely beneficial, whether you're actively feeling it or, working on it outside of, the physical feelings of it. It's the questioning, the constant questioning of everything, including yourself and your idea of yourself and your perception of yourself.
Especially yourself, right? Like that's really it. And because it's funny how we become scared. If I question myself too much, I'm going to lose all sense of who I am. It's like that's kind of funny, right? Because you're not your idea of who you are. You can't actually lose yourself. You can lose your idea of yourself, but all that really means is you've unlocked your potential.
Yeah. That infinite field of possibilities that you're all of a sudden you're sitting in, instead of, being sure of whatever and then being afraid of losing it and being afraid of being perceived differently. It's like when there's nothing to perceive, you don't give a shit how you're perceived.
Exactly. That's it. That's it. It's like it doesn't even dawn on me that I should care what people think about me anymore, right? Because whatever they think, it's not based on me, right? And I know that, and I know that because it's true for me as well, right? When I'm looking for something in others, that's what I see. When I'm no longer looking for something, when I no longer want to see the best in people, then I see people, and I see who they actually are, because my preference isn't in the way. Neither is my fear. right? And that's the only real way to deal with anybody is to let down the walls that you think protect you, but also blind you from seeing who they really are. Right? Because I mean, how can you see them if you can't see you? It's like Jesus in the whole thing about, remove the beam from your own eye before you talk about the speck in mine. Right. It's a hell of a visual, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's the same wall, the wall that's protecting you, and the wall that's, creating this sense of security, and the wall of division. All the same wall.
So funny. So we're going to wrap up this episode because I think we've approached an hour and a half. I know we've been talking for like 2 hours, but episode 7, this has been great. And then next week, of course, we will be recording episode 8. And on Tuesday, we will be starting our manifestation workshop. So definitely don't miss that. This has been a great episode. This conversation has been a lot of fun. It feels like, even though I talked to you yesterday, there's always so much time in between our conversations, man. There's always so many things that happen. I feel like I've lived another lifetime between the last podcast episode and this podcast episode. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how this continues to evolve. Episode 7, we're on to 8 next. That's awesome.
Awesome. Yeah, it's been so much fun. And likewise.
Well, everyone, we will see you next week for episode 8. Thanks for joining us.
All right. Bye, everyone.